Welcome to DiveVibe. Today we're going to be taking another look at the Yuri Lipski tragedy, but this time we're going to be doing a little fact-checking on MrBallen's video. So stay tuned. How long have you guys been here? All right, here we go. So, we've already taken a look at the super sad Yuri Lipski video, but today I would like to take a look at MrBallen's interpretation of this, because he did a video where he comments on kind of the whole story, whereas I just reacted to the video. So we're going to go through that. And I didn't start this channel to bash on other vets. That's not what this is about. I've got a lot of respect for him as a fellow veteran. And he's a Navy SEAL, so he's got to know a good bit about diving. Not sure if he knows as much as a technical instructor. I guess we're going to find that out, but I'm sure he knows plenty enough to react to this video. But without further ado, let's get started, because I'm pretty excited to watch this. All right, here we go. Number 3, The Descent.
On April 28, 2000, a 24-year-old named Yuri Lipski was standing in front of a cafe in Dahab, Egypt, overlooking the Red Sea. He had traveled all the way to the Sinai Peninsula from Moscow in order to film himself swimming through the Arch. But now it was looking like that probably wasn't going to happen. The Arch is an 85-foot-long underwater tunnel that...
All right, so that's actually pretty common. People go on dive trips thinking they're going to do one thing or the other. They get really excited. Like a great example would be in Cozumel, Punta Sur, which means South Point, but the dive site is called the Devil's Throat. It's like pretty deep, 130, 120 feet, or wherever you enter it. I know you get spat out at like 130 feet, but it's a really deep swim through, really deep swim through, and a lot of people think, oh yeah, I got to do that. It's really cool, but a lot of people really aren't ready for it. But a lot of the dive guides there are really good about making sure that nobody goes on that dive that isn't ready for it. Typically, they want to dive with you beforehand to make sure that you're capable of actually doing that dive. So this is something that Yuri's running into. Basically, he's getting there, he wants to do this dive, and he's finding out that he lacks the experience, and problems ensue.
Connects a massive sinkhole right on Dahab shoreline called the Blue Hole to the Red Sea. To get to the Arch, you need to enter the Blue Hole directly and descend straight down.
I'm gonna dive there so bad!
Feet, where you'll reach the top of the tunnel on the northeast side. But there's a catch. If on your descent you happen to miss the ceiling of this arch, which apparently it's pretty easy to do, you run the risk of going too deep. Now, going too deep does not mean you're going to miss the tunnel altogether. The arch actually starts at 181 feet, but then goes all the way down to 393 feet. So it's a huge, huge opening. The risk of going too deep has to do with how your body responds to the type of gas you're breathing. For those who are unfamiliar with diving, generally speaking, you have two types of dives. There's recreational diving, where you breathe the same air that you breathe on the surface. They literally jam air directly into scuba bottles. You breathe that, and you go down to 130 feet. That's the recommended bottom depth that you would go down breathing regular air. And then there is technical.
Yeah. So far, he's right. Recreational diving is typically what we call no-stop diving, which means, or no ceiling, meaning you don't go into overhead environments that are more than 130 linear feet from the surface. You don't go into decompression, because that's a kind of a theoretical, a deco requirement ceiling, kind of the same thing as having a roof over your head, except for you could ascend past it. It just wouldn't be good for you. Now he's going to talk about technical diving and the difference in how we introduce decompression and mixed gases and stuff like that. So let's see what he's got to say. I'm very interested to hear his take on technical diving.
Diving, where you breathe a special mixture of gases. Typically, it's going to be a mixture of helium, nitrogen, and oxygen that allow you to go below 130 feet. This type of diving is exponentially more dangerous and requires all sorts of additional training. Because the minimum depth you would need to go to in order to access the arch is 181 feet, that puts you well in the technical diving range, which means you should be diving mixed gas and have special training and equipment.
Yeah, anytime you're going past 130 feet, you are really messing with some inert gas narcosis. A lot of times it gets called nitrogen narcosis, really inert gas narcosis, because depending on who you ask, oxygen is narcotic and can also give you the same effects as nitrogen narcosis. So we just call it inert gas narcosis now. So that's one of the things to deal with. Getting to 185 feet, we need to worry about oxygen toxicity and stuff like that. And we're certainly going to be having to worry about a lengthy decompression depending on how long they're down there. You could go down and come up fast probably without hitting any deco, but it wouldn't be smart. The rate would be unsafe. This is not a dive that you would do without technical training if you were wise.
But year after year, people try to dive down to the arch and go through it on regular air. And year after year, people die doing it. When your body absorbs too much nitrogen, you can get something called nitrogen narcosis, which is a lot like being drunk. And in extreme cases, divers who get this have been known.
So just to reiterate, what he's talking about, nitrogen narcosis, just a little bit slightly behind the times what he's saying, calling it nitrogen narcosis versus inert gas narcosis. Nothing wrong with it. Everybody recognizes what you're talking about. No big deal. Just wanted to clarify that we are talking about the same thing.
Known to remove their mouthpiece and inhale water, believing they are actually on the surface. Below 130 feet, your body absorbs nitrogen much faster, and regular air is a whopping 78% nitrogen. So the risk of getting
a lot of nitrogen
is exponentially higher if you're breathing regular air below 130 feet. Also, oxygen can become toxic the deeper you go in the water column. It can lead to blackouts and convulsions that if you don't have someone there to literally physically move you up in the water column, you won't recover from it and you'll die. Regular air contains 21% oxygen, which is a lot of oxygen.
Yeah, I mean, someone has to hold your mouthpiece in your mouth, and you have to still have a seal around the mouthpiece so that you don't fill up with water. It's just it's oxygen toxicity, like CNS oxygen toxicity, the convulsions and all that stuff underwater, that is not a super survivable situation to be in. That's why some people opt for these pod things where you can actually lock a regulator into it or a full face mask. I hate both of those options, so I'm just very careful with my PO2s, with my oxygen limits, and I keep it under 1.6 at all times. I watch my CNS carefully, and I don't go too crazy with high PO2s on my rebreather. So basically, I'm careful so that I don't have to wear that stuff. But this is a major problem, and a lot of people wonder, why can't I go deeper than 130 feet? Because there's all this stuff. Oh, and by the way, all this stuff just gets harder the deeper you go. You add in more stuff, like hypoxic trimix. You got gases that you can't breathe too deep. Now you got gases that you can't breathe too shallow. It's a mess. Take the training. So fun and rewarding, but make sure you get the training.
So if you're diving regular air below 130 feet, you are at an increased risk of developing O2 toxicity. Now, to be clear, it is possible on regular air to dive down to 181 feet and make it through the arch and come out the other side and be just fine.
It's possible.
But you're realistically at 181 feet pushing the absolute boundary of what you can get away with on regular air. Below 200 feet, you're probably dead. So if you're attempting to swim through the arch on regular air, you need to be paying very close attention to your depth as you descend so that you don't miss the arch and accidentally drift down below 181 feet to the very deadly 200 feet and beyond. So earlier in the day, Yuri had gone down to the edge of the blue hole and he had found one of the diving instructors that taught inside the blue hole. His name was Tarek Omar, and he asked him if he'd be willing to take him down to the arch to help him film himself going through the arch. And Tarek said, yes, but I need to train you for 2 weeks before you're going to be considered qualified to do that. And you need a special setup with a special gas mixture to do this dive. And Yuri was like, well, I'm leaving in 2 days to head back to Moscow, so I need to do this dive now. Is there any way you can do it today or tomorrow even? And Tarek was like, no, that's not how this works. And Tarek understood this more than anybody else, because in addition to teaching diving at the blue hole, Tarek's job was to dive down to the bottom and retrieve the dead bodies of inexperienced or overconfident divers that attempted the archway and didn't make it. Although there is no...
I don't know that it was necessarily his job, but certainly it kind of falls to the most experienced diver in the area to do stuff like that. That's why in Florida, in the cave country, a lot of the cave instructors that you see bumming around down there are actually also cave rescue divers. And typically, it's not cave rescue, it's more cave body recovery. And they usually get, compensated by the sheriff's department. I don't know. They might be doing it on a volunteer basis. I've never asked. But yeah, that's a thing.
Not an official body count of how many people have perished inside of the blue hole, locals believe it's as high as 200 people just in the last decade. After Tarek was unwilling to take him without properly training him and outfitting him with the right equipment, Yuri thanked him and went on to a couple different other diving instructors with the same request. Will you take me in the next couple of days? And they all said, no, we need to train you and you need special equipment. And so finally, after no one was willing to do this, Yuri just left. Later that day, owners of cafes that overlooked the blue hole remember seeing a young man who was by himself walk to the edge of the blue hole. He puts on all of his scuba gear, he puts on a helmet and then straps a big camera to the top and ratchets it down. And then after he's got all his stuff on, he jumps into the blue hole and he disappears. That man was Yuri.
Definitely not him.
A few days later, Yuri's family back home in Moscow did not see him get off the flight he was supposed to be on, and they reported him missing. Tarek Omar was contacted to go down into the blue hole and see if Yuri was down there. Tarek hopped in the blue hole, he went to the bottom, and sure enough, lying face down at the bottom was Yuri. When they brought Yuri to the surface, they realized his camera had been running the whole time, and he had actually filmed his final moments. Yuri's final video exists online, so you can watch it for yourself, but here is a description of what happens. After situating his camera on his head just the way he wanted it, he hit record, and then he jumped into the water. It was determined later on that Yuri was breathing regular air out of his tanks. The camera submerges under the water, and then Yuri begins to sink very quickly into the blue hole. But his breathing seems normal, and he's not thrashing around, so it seems like...
That looks like an actual technical diver.
But at some point, you hear Yuri trying to activate his buoyancy compensator. Basically, it's this life jacket, to describe it simply, that sits on your gear that you have a demand valve where you can inflate and deflate the air into it to neutralize your buoyancy. Or in an emergency situation, you can fully inflate it and stop yourself from sinking. In fact, you'll rise to the surface.
All right, so some of you are certified, but some of my subscribers and viewers are definitely not certified. So buoyancy control device, it's kind of the piece of gear that ties it all together. Tank straps to the back of it, regulator attaches, connects to an inflator because the BCD, the buoyancy control device, has a buoyancy cell. It's basically like a big plastic bag that's usually encased in some kind of cordura to keep it safe from getting cut and all that stuff. And you've got a power inflator that's connected to your tank. You press a button, it fills it up with air. You hold another button down, and if you hold your inflator all the way up, it'll let the air come out of that so you can adjust your buoyancy. And basically what that's for is to kind of compensate for the extra weight that you need at the end of the dive to stay down. On the most simple dives. Sometimes it's to compensate for extra gear you have to carry, but when you're just diving a single tank, recreational diving, it's to compensate for the buoyancy swing and the weight that you need to carry because of that. So at the beginning of the dive, you're going to have some air in your BCD. Towards the end of the dive, you're going to have very little to no air in your BCD when you're doing your nice safety stop, if you're perfectly weighted. In a technical dive, sometimes you just need it for big, heavy tanks and stuff. And in that case, a lot of times it's a good idea to have like redundant buoyancy, and that can be, many different ways. Some people use redundant wings. I don't really love those. A lot of people use dry suit. I like dry suit. Counterlinks from the Rebreather. Some people even use a lift bag or a DSMB or something like that. But it's a good idea to have redundant buoyancy when you've got that much weight on you. Hopefully that makes sense. All right.
He's trying to activate his buoyancy compensator to slow down his descent, and the air is escaping his compensator. There's a leak, and he can't slow down his descent. Now, Yuri was wearing a weight belt, which is very common in diving. In fact, I don't really know all that many dive.
So how common is a leak on a BCD? Well, a leak obviously can come from the BCD being torn, but especially on newer BCDs where the inflator actually screws in to the BCD where it interfaces with it, sometimes that can just come a little bit loose and air can leak around the gasket and you can have a BCD that's not working. We've had divers a lot of times come from the mainland, and there's some instructors in the mainland that teach their students that when they pack their BCD, they should remove the inflator so that it doesn't get broken, which isn't the worst advice in the world. But what happens a lot is that gasket, that seal that keeps it from leaking, gets lost in their gear bag. They screw it on, not even knowing that there was supposed to be a gasket there in the first place, because it's not their, it's not their job. They're just basic scuba certification. They don't know everything. So now they've got a BCD that doesn't hold air, and then they neglect to do their pre-dive safety check, which would include checking your BCD to make sure that it's functioning. And then you get in the water and the thing's leaking. So at this point, unless something happened once he got into the water, if Yuri had done a pre-dive safety check, he would have known that his BCD wasn't working. And any technical diver, that's like day one stuff. You check everything before you get in the water, and then when you get in, you're probably checking it again. So with your descent checks and splash checks. Okay, here we go. Let's watch some more.
That you wouldn't use a weight belt. And any diver knows that there is a quick release function on your weight belt. Specifically, if you're in an uncontrolled descent, or if you're in an emergency situation and need to get to the surface, you can jettison your weight belt and go to the surface. But Yuri was panicking, and he was...
And that's not always an option, depending on how you set up your stuff, using a backplate and wing with just pockets, or maybe you put all your weight on the tank bands on the back of your BCD in your trim pockets. You can't access that stuff all the time. Now, if you're real slick, there's ways you can do it. Reach back, open it, and then turn upside down and let it dump. Hope it doesn't hit you in the head or whatever. But, yeah, this is going to be a long video if I don't shut up. All right, let's go.
Fixated on his buoyancy compensator that he was desperately trying to activate, and it was failing, and so he's not going for his weight belt. And then he rockets past the entrance to the arch, so he goes below 181 feet, he goes below 200 feet,
I didn't
he
even
goes
see
all
it.
the way to the bottom, where he hits the bottom at 392 feet, and then he begins to slide, because the bottom of the blue hole was actually at an angle, and that archway went all the way to the bottom of the hole. And if you slipped out of the blue hole, it was a sheer drop off for thousands of feet. And you see on camera, Yuri rolls over and he's desperately clawing into the mud to stop himself from sliding out of the blue hole to definite death. And he's trying to get himself to stop, and finally he anchors himself in the dirt. And it's calm for a second, and he's kind of looking around. It's very clear he's confused, and then it goes still. And it's believed at this point he either removed his mouthpiece because of nitrogen narcosis, he pulled it out and inhaled water, or he was dealing with O2 toxicity and he blacked out and the mouthpiece came out. But either way, he drowned.
All right. So, I don't know. It sounded real good. Very compelling storyteller, MrBallen's is. And that was actually, I really liked that video. The way it was laid out. Great. Good job. And I think the story sounds very plausible. That end part where he talks about him being still, having seen the video, it doesn't really seem all that still to me. But it's plausible. Let me know what you think in the comments. I think that would be a great topic for us to discuss. Let's see if we can get to the bottom of what really happened, because really the only person that knows is Yuri. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for watching that video with me. Like, comment, and subscribe, especially if you're new here, and make sure you hit that bell notification icon so you get notified when my videos come out. A couple of cool things. First of all, if you'd like to buy me a beer, support the channel, then check out my Patreon in the description. And you can also check out the link to Bonfire in the description, because I've got a brand new shirt. Oh my goodness, it's been the same old DiveVibe shirt for how long? We got a brand new shirt designed by my friend, Mr. Neil Hugenpimp. It looks like this. There. Right there. That's where it is. Man, that is a cool shirt. But yeah, you can get, that's available now. I don't even have one yet, so go out and pick one up. Mine is in the mail. Super stoked about that. But thank you guys so much for diving with me today, and I will see you in the water. All right, well, while I've got you here, I just wanted to give you a quick update on the channel. So from now on, at the end of every video, there's going to be a list of my small list right now of my patrons from Patreon. So if you want to be on that list, link to Patreon is in the description. Thanks. Have a great day.